Hi everyone, you're really welcome to this webinar about our really new and exciting Masters, our LLM in Criminology, Criminal Justice and Human Rights. And I'm really grateful for Lucy and Lisa's help organising, and particularly to my colleagues Rory, Ellen and Charles, who have come to tell us all about their fantastic modules on the course. This is a really cross-disciplinary programme with loads of great opportunities, both for learning and expanding our networks and getting some skills. And what we'll do in the webinar, I'll have some slides, we'll talk through the programme, some of the modules, some of the opportunities. If anyone has questions, they can go in the live chat, but what I propose is we answer them at the end of the webinar, if that's okay. And looking at the participant list, it's so lovely to see interest from so many countries around the world. So we're really excited, and we hope we answer some of your questions today with this. So I'm going to share my slides now, hopefully. And okay, if someone can just let me know if these are visible.
Yes, that's fine.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to just spend the next 15-20 minutes going through the structure, focus of the programme, and some of the cool things we're going to cover in the course. First of all, you would all be very welcome here to come and study at the University of Galway and in the School of Law. This is a joint programme between one of the research clusters within the School of Law, the Crime, Punishment and Rights Cluster, and also one of our leading research centres, the Irish Centre for Human Rights. And while you're here, you can also take modules from our other programmes and other centres as well. So we also have a Centre for Disability, Law and Policy, and a Centre for Housing, Law, Rights and Policy. So very strong research-led programmes. And of course, this is one of our latest offerings. We have a really dynamic student body with students coming from all over the world to study here, particularly at the LLM programs. You can see a wide list of countries represented here, and I saw some others represented on the list of participants for this webinar, so that's great. My name's Roisin, and I'm the program director of this new LLM program. I also work with lots of colleagues in our Crime, Punishment and Rights Research Cluster, and my own personal interests and kind of research expertise is in punishment, penology, human rights of prisoners. And like many of my colleagues here today, I work with a wide range of organisations, both regionally and internationally, to develop real social change based on the research that we conduct here. You're going to meet three of these colleagues here today. Dr. Ellen Wall, an expert on the right to protest and public order, with a wide range of publications, including his more recent book on law and disorder. Excuse me. Professor Siobhan Mullally is the director of the Irish Centre of Human Rights. She is currently the UN Special Rapporteur on Trafficking and is also a member of the Department of Foreign Affairs Standing Committee on Human Rights. Sorry, 1 second. We have Dr. Charles O'Mahony, who's a specialist in disability law and policy, mental health law and policy, and we're proud to share that he has co-edited one of the first books on the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And last but not least, on this slide at least, we have Dr. Rory Kelly, who is a criminal law and sentencing expert and has a variety of current projects looking at things as diverse as prison labour, sentencing, stalking. But we have many, many other colleagues who teach on this programme, both from the School of Law, the centres, and the Irish Centre for Human Rights. One of the reasons we thought it was really important to create and bring together modules on this topic Every night when you look at the news, what do you see? It's this real intersection between criminal justice issues and how rights inform them or can be used to address problems we see in society. Recently, in this country and further afield, we've seen huge issues around policing far-right protests and indeed peaceful protests. How we design prisons to deal with trauma, persons who've experienced trauma, huge issues relating to overcrowding in prisons. We've seen issues in international criminal law about age, illness, fitness to plead in relation to particular defendants. So how do we learn from criminology? How do we learn from human rights to inform these criminal justice institutions and processes and penalties? This programme can be taken either on a full-time basis or a part-time basis. And as I mentioned, it's primarily delivered, the kind of core modules will be primarily delivered by staff from our specialist research cluster on crime, punishment and rights, and also from the Irish Centre for Human Rights. And it's really about taking this cross-disciplinary approach to these issues in recognition of the fact that we feel you can't really understand a lot of criminal justice issues without exploring and understanding the underpinning human rights, norms, and obligations that go with them. And we really have tried to design the course in terms of both its substantive content and skills training and opportunities to provide students with a critical understanding of the issues at the forefront of criminal justice, law, policy and practice. The different modules on the course will be assessed using slightly different means, and you'll hear about some of those today from my colleagues. But primarily it will be based on essays, presentations, and a minor thesis or a dissertation. There's a lot of information on this screen, and I'll go through some of it just to give you a flavour or an idea about the different modules you can take and one that you have to take if you come and join us on this LLM programme. So you can see the kind of sums at the top. Everyone on the LLM will start the year with this compulsory module, Criminology, Criminal Justice and Human Rights. The idea of this is to really introduce students to the really cross-disciplinary nature of the course, introduce you to key methodological research skills that you can use in these fields and as a cross-disciplinary approach, and also to introduce wider advocacy and dissemination skills you could use in a potential career following completion of the module. Then students will have to take 30 credits from this list, you can see, of core modules. And that's really to ensure you have this core specialisation when you graduate from the course. We're going to hear today about policing security and rights from my colleague, Dr. Ilan Wall. I'll talk a little bit about imprisonment and rights. Our colleague, Professor O'Connell, teaches advocacy, activism and public interest law. My colleague, Dr. O'Mahony, will talk to the module on minority groups and the criminal justice system. And Rory Kelly will speak to sentencing and penal law and policy. You can see the others then you can take there, crime and disorder, criminal jury, and also really kind of foundational and fundamental courses on human rights law, international criminal law, transitional justice. Rory Kelly might also speak a little about the counterterrorism and human rights course, and we can also do the procedure before international criminal courts course. With the remaining credits, you can of course take more of these core modules, or you could opt to take any other programme available across the school. So that really gives you an opportunity to tailor the type of programme that you have when you leave here, whether you want to look more at methods, you want to do more applied module like the clinic, the Human Rights Law Clinic. You could specialise further in international law, or try to take more kind of specific topics like climate justice or gender and human rights. So they're just an example of the other modules you can take. while you're here with us. Then the course finishes with the minor thesis for 30 credits, which is over the summer, in first year if you're full-time, or the second year if you're a part-time student. So I take the course Imprisonment in Rights, and it's a really kind of wide-ranging course, and we're also open to kind of tailoring it every year according to what new thing is happening in the world. But mostly we'll start with a really grounding discussion of the development and evolution of the international standards that are used to create a minimum standard of protection for prisoners and guidelines for how we manage prisons. We might look at the impact of overcrowding on those rights developed in those standards. We can move away from the kind of norms and principles and look at the very specific needs of particular groups of prisoners, like women, children, foreign prisoners, transgender prisoners. We'll explore the international obligations in relation to death investigations and preventing deaths in prisons. Then we'll look at some kind of operational realities and how they intersect with rights, such as body searches, hunger strikes, solitary confinement in prisons. And we will also explore, in addition to the kind of standard discussions about these things, more critical perspectives, including the discussion around abolition of imprisonment in prisons. So I'll hand over to my colleague, Dr. Ilan Wall, to discuss policing, security and rights.
Hi everyone, thanks Roisin. Yes,
sorry.
That's okay. So I will be running this new module, Policing, Security and Rights. This is a module, as the title suggests, which engages in the relations between rights and security, in particular thinking about the ways in which states seek to shroud a great deal of their activity in a kind of opacity or a secrecy. And then to think about the way in which law can sometimes challenge that idea of security and begin to set regulations and rules which may restrain the state as it polices some part of its population, a kind of suspect population. What's more, we'll also do a kind of a critical take on that, thinking about whether or not law and human rights in general does in fact restrain the state, or whether or not it sometimes intensifies or accelerates security measures by giving them a kind of a shroud of legitimacy, I suppose. We'll end up focusing primarily on policing protests because that's my area of research. That's one of the kind of key areas I work on. But I think it's also an area of thinking about security where there are a number of really meaty, difficult questions to be answered. Firstly, because in the moment of protest, it is the people or a section of the populace who push back against state power, and in that moment they become a threat in some sense to the state, and so the state then deploys some of its most extreme measures against them. But at the same time, we would have something like the right to protest, which would seek to protect those people in that moment of dissent. And so I think it's a really interesting moment where a number of the kind of key questions of relations of security and rights come out. The module does open that back out to also think a little bit about security regimes around borders, security regimes around terrorism, around drugs and other things like that. But it is primarily focusing in on the moment of protest as a way into thinking about security. So there are a number of kind of topics which we engage with in that context. There is questions around surveillance, questions around predictive policing, around the use of force, and as Roisin also commented, around policing itself, right, and the question of abolition and whether there are other ways of managing society. The module is assessed by way of a podcast. And so that's one of the kind of distinctive things that we do in this master's. Sometimes masters overemphasize, I suppose, the written word and the production of a short or quite long piece of writing. And that's great because it develops certain skills, right? But what we're trying to do in this master's is also try and introduce a whole series of other skills which you can show off just how innovative you are. So to train you to put together a podcast, I run a whole series of workshops which cover things like editing, how to affect an audience, how to communicate a story, how to narrativize a story, how to plan it out, how to record it, etc., etc., etc. There's lots of material there, and it's really quite fun. And what's more, the best of those podcasts hopefully will be published in one of the various different fora that we have within the cluster or within the Human Rights Centre. And so the best work which is produced within the module will be available to the public, which I think is a really nice aspect. What's more, there's a whole series of other things that are going on that Roisin alluded to. I'm very excited because just this morning I got word that the policing authority, the head of the policing authority, Helen Hall, has agreed to come to Galway. And so she specifically is interested in speaking to the students. And so one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that we're providing connections for you, that we're helping you make connections which will help you as you go forward into a career. The other thing which I'm super excited about, which we'll definitely offer to our criminology students, is that I'm working with the Irish Centre for the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, running a legal observer training program for protests. And so that's kind of supplementary going on outside of the LLM, but very much kind of part of the same kind of cohort and part of the same kind of drive that we're undertaking here in the law school in Galway. And with that, I might hand back to Roisin or Rory or Charles.
Thanks so much. Yeah, that's really informative and all sounds absolutely fantastic. Charles, if I can hand the floor to you, please, to introduce your module.
Great, thanks Roisin, and thanks Ellen. Really interesting to hear about your module. I'm Charles O'Mahony. I'm a lecturer in the School of Law, and as Roisin said, I research in the area of disability law and policy and mental health law and policy, and I look across both civil and criminal law. I'm also a member of the Human Rights Committee of the Mental Health Commission. And I just want to say, I think doing a master's is a really good thing. I've done 2 masters, so I obviously would think that's a good thing. I did a master's here at the University of Galway and also one at University College London. So I think it's a really good thing to do. And after I did my master's, I worked for the Law Reform Commission of Ireland, and I also worked for Amnesty International Ireland as their legal officer. And it was certainly the skills and the training that I got, particularly from my master's here in Galway, that really gave me the skills to be able to be competitive for those jobs, but also to do the work that I was employed to do for those organisations. So I think it's a really good thing to do a master's. It helps you, develop expertise, and there's very good opportunities here, as Roisin has been speaking about, and Ilan, and there's a really good opportunity to network with really key people in the area of criminology, criminal justice, human rights. And it's a very good place to study. It's very supportive here in Galway. A great academic environment, but also a great opportunity from a social perspective and for personal growth and to make friends and to grow your network. So I think it's a great place to study at the master's level. So to talk a little bit about my module, which is minority groups and the criminal justice system. In this module, really what we are looking at is the experiences of minority groups when they come into contact with the criminal justice system. And the way that the module is designed is to provide you with the knowledge and skills needed to critically engage with core issues in this kind of area. So we're looking really at the experiences of, for example, children and people with disabilities, including people with intellectual disability, learning disabilities, people with mental health problems, and neurodiversity. Members of the LGBTQ+ community, members of the traveller community, race and women, and other groups as well. So we're looking at their experiences when they come into contact with the criminal justice system. And we'll look at really important topics like fitness to plead, the insanity defence, diversion from the criminal justice system, stop and search, the experience of people with limited native language proficiency within the court system in Ireland and other jurisdictions, racial profiling, and many other topics. And by examining law and policy from different jurisdictions, we seek to provide you with a comprehensive understanding of not only the law and policy, but the ability to use sources of law, domestic sources of law, constitutional rights, international and regional human rights law, as a kind of a guiding framework, a lens which we can look at the experiences of minority groups when they come into contact with the criminal justice system, and to understand people's experiences as suspects, defendants, prisoners, and also victims of crime, and ensuring that we understand the challenges and difficulties faced by minority groups in interacting with the criminal justice system. And I suppose really at the core of a lot of our conversations is the whole concept of access to justice, understanding systemic inequalities within the justice system, and the experiences of minority groups. Just to talk a little bit then about the assessment of this module, I assess this module by way of portfolio. So the premise of the assessment is that you're working for a human rights NGO in the space of human rights, criminal justice, and there's a set of tasks then which are assigned to you, which are very practical. So they're research-based, and they're really helping you to develop a set of competencies that will support you as you transition from your master's into professional life. So I'll talk more about that when we come into the module, but there will be also guest speakers. And the process taken in the module is that it's kind of based on problem-based learning, challenge-based learning, and working also as part of a team. So there's about 5 different assessments, and you build up your credits over the course of the semester, and then you have a good set of skills then which you will be able to apply in the real world once you come out of your master's program. So that's really a quick overview of the module. I look forward to welcoming you to Galway hopefully in September and getting to know you, and definitely consider doing a master's, whether it's in Galway or elsewhere. It's a wonderful thing to do. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Charles. And then Dr. Rory Kelly, if you'd like to take the floor and tell us about your sentencing and penal policy module.
Yeah, happily, and I'd like to warn everyone against speaking last and following such lucid colleagues, particularly when they steal your story. I was going to say how important it is to do a master's because mine led me to work at the Law Commission of England and Wales, ground covered. One of the huge advantages, though, of engaging in a master's is that you're with a smaller cohort that's focused on an area you're very much interested in. Having done the more generalist undergraduate degree in whatever it may be, you come to say, actually, these were my 2 or 3 favorite modules. And here is an opportunity to become a specialist in them, and also to make contacts and frame yourself in that manner as you set up your future careers. Yes, all horribly pragmatic at the end. For now, sentencing and penal policy. My intention with this module is to make it as comparative as possible. So we'll look to address cutting-edge issues in sentencing and law reform and penal policy reform, not only with Ireland in mind, but also looking at England and Wales as a jurisdiction. We'll look at international law too, and we will endeavour to have some comparison to Australia and the United States. What are we going to do with all this comparison? We're going to try and answer some fundamental questions in sentencing and penal theory. The underlying and dangerous first question is, how do we justify punishment at all? We'll look at more theoretical accounts like retributivism and consequentialism, but we'll also look at the more practical drive for ever-increased sentences, ever-increased maximum sentences in particular, to see on the one hand how in theory it can be so hard to justify a practice, on the other, more policy-orientated hand, how it can be quite easy to justify ever more changes. That's not everything. We'll then turn to how we should structure sentencing. Should we have a system of guidelines as has been adopted in other jurisdictions, or should we trust judges to get it right in the case before them? They are, after all, the experts. Or should we go in a complete other direction and have mandatory sentences? Sentences set by a legislator that must be applied in practice. And if we had such sentences, could they align with the constitutional and human rights of the offender? Which brings us into our next set of core questions. Can sentencing respect the rights of the offender? I found in teaching criminal evidence and substantive criminal law, students often think in terms of rights there, i.e. the presumption of innocence. But even following conviction, important rights still hold for the offender. For example, there's a prohibition on retrospective punishment. You may not impose a sentence greater than that applicable at the time the offence was committed. We'll get into the messy detail of what that means and how we protect that right, and whether we protect it sufficiently in practice. But we can't over-focus on the rights of the offender. It must now be asked as well, can sentencing respect the rights of the victim? What would that even mean? Should the victim have a voice in what level of sentence is imposed, or in explaining what harm was done to them, or indeed something else? To focus on rights, human rights, isn't only to look at the offender. I'm more boring than my colleagues, as you'll no doubt be discovering. We are going to be doing a 5,000-word essay in my module. It forms a more traditionalist, perhaps, part of an interesting package. Roisin, at this point, can I also introduce counterterrorism and human rights, or would that
Of
be
course, yeah, please, yeah.
Okay, being somewhat deviant and doubling here. With Professor Brian Farrell from University of Iowa, we'll be offering a course on counterterrorism and human rights. Super interesting because we'll get to cut across criminal law, criminal justice, evidence, and more procedural issues as we talk about, well, should we be criminalizing people for who they associate with? Should the police be able to use stop and search powers? Should the presumption of innocence have the same weight when the right to life and wider security interests are at stake? How does Ireland answer these questions? How do other jurisdictions answer these questions? What is terrorism and why is it special? So a real chance to draw strands from across the course together into one module. I look forward to seeing you on either or both at a later point. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Rory. I want to do the course myself after hearing my colleagues talk about their courses. They're fantastic. So that's kind of an insight into really research-led modules. They're driven by research, which means they're really fresh, they're really up to date, they reflect what's happening in the world and in scholarship and in practice. But as part of the modules and as part of the overall program, we have and are increasing the range of visits we will hold to criminal justice institutions that will align with the topics you take while you're here. The photograph you can see at the top is 2 years ago, we went to Limerick Prison. We also went again this year, which is a really great way to learn about how the standards and principles and norms you hear about in class are operationalized in practice. We are also delighted that we have a seminar series from our Crime, Punishment and Rights cluster, and we launched this year in collaboration with Palas Cinema here in Galway, a film series from this cluster as well. And our first event was showing In the Name of the Father, a film about miscarriages of justice in the British courts, and we're going to have an event to mark the anniversary of those miscarriages actually in the first semester, hopefully, or second semester while this new master's takes hold. As part of the compulsory module you would take as part of this LLM, we have embedded in the compulsory module specialist methodological skills training. So looking at empirical skills, quantitative skills, ethics considerations, archival research, all the different skill sets that you would perhaps use in a career focused along these lines. And as my colleagues have just explained, many of your individual specialist modules will also contain really focused methodological skills training as well. As part of your compulsory module and some of your individual modules, we've also embedded kind of advocacy skills, dissemination skills that you can use in this field, such as podcast production, graphic design. We have one on storytelling. So as Ilan described, really trying to think about the story we want to tell and how do we get it across to different audiences to really have maximum impact on societal change. As this is a joint programme with the Irish Centre for Human Rights, there are also opportunities to take part in the Human Rights Clinic, which is very much aligned to what Charles explained about really working with an NGO or industry or governmental or non-governmental partner or charity on a really concrete project and trying to come up with solutions or plans for change. I already mentioned the film series, but we're going to this year create a student committee to really help us design and plan for the films that we host, because it's not just about turning up at the cinema and getting your popcorn. We have introductory speakers and we can have discussions around some of these really key fundamental issues raised through the medium of film, and to have a really discursive but also social event. This year as well, one of the opportunities or initiatives students can choose to become involved in is a leading NGO in prisoner rights has offered opportunities for students to conduct research and have their work published in their leading annual publication on global prison trends. So students can apply to be involved in this as well. So you're starting to develop your CV with some perhaps publications, really solid links with NGOs and charities through the different modules and initiatives. I mean, the career opportunities are really whatever you want them to be. From our own experiences and from what we see graduates do, we see a range of opportunities if you take this course. That can be going into legal practice, policy development, advocacy, or just pure research in these fields, whether individually or as a cross-disciplinary approach. Or it might be you have a particular career path in mind, or you're already in the specific career path that works in these fields, perhaps in the courts or with the prison services or police services here or in other countries. We also see lots of opportunities for work in regional and international organizations, courts and tribunals, with the skill set and with the substantive knowledge you would acquire during your time during this program at the University of Galway. Now for the more dry stuff, I suppose, but the important stuff, the entry requirements. Applicants would be ordinarily be expected to have an equivalent to a second-class honours degree, grade 1, in law, but also in other relevant disciplines, which might include political science, social sciences, or the humanities. For some people who maybe don't have that degree score, we will also take into consideration relevant professional experience in law, but also other relevant fields of work that link back to the course. So please do include those in your application. There are some additional country-specific entry requirements that are available on the International Office website, and I think there's a link for that on the webpage. So we're really excited to welcome new faces and old faces to the course in September 2024. We're open for applications and we have been making offers on a continuous basis and will continue to do so. But I suppose the earlier you submit to us, the better, please. You can see the fee scales for both EU and non-EU applicants on the slide here. And there's also a link here for your applications and what is required when you submit your application: proof of identity, personal statement, a written reference, and if you need to provide evidence of English language. There is also some information available about scholarships at this link on the slide, which should be available to all participants. And if you have any other questions that you think of after today, please don't hesitate to contact either myself, this is my email address at the top, or at our law school office at the email, the second email you can see here. So that's it for the slides. I'll leave the slides and we'll go back to